Jonah being in the belly of the big fish. These chapters that come in this reading tell the rest of the story. The being in the belly of the big fish was in chapter 2, so you can sort of position it as I read. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Go at once to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid his fare, and he went on board to go with him to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, Get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I tell you. So Jonah set out and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly large city, a 3 days' walk across. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's walk. And he cried out, 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and everyone, great and small, put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. Then he had a proclamation made in Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, no human being or animal, no herd or flock shall taste anything. They shall not feed, nor shall they drink water. Human beings and animals shall be covered with sackcloth, and they shall cry mightily to God. All shall turn from their evil ways and from the violence that is in their hands. Who knows? God may relent and change his mind. He may turn from his fierce anger, so that we do not perish. When God saw what they did, how they turned away from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity that he had said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. But this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said while I was still in my own country? This is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning. For I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing. And now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Here ends the reading.
So it was not my intention to bring Valentine's Day into this morning at all. It really wasn't. For one thing, it always seems to be too easy a lead-in for this particular Sunday. And at the same time, the fact of the matter is Valentine's Day for a lot of people is not exactly their favorite holiday. So I really intended, I tried so hard not to bring Valentine's Day into this. But then, excuse me, then a couple of days ago I ran across a story and my good intentions went right out the window. I don't know if you saw this or not, But for Valentine's Day this year, the Bronx Zoo offered people the opportunity to name a cockroach after someone that they are, let me put it this way, not particularly fond of. And not just any cockroach, something called a Madagascar hissing cockroach, which apparently is one of the largest species of cockroach on the planet. It grows to about 2 to 3 inches long. Eesh. And appropriate to its name, it also apparently makes a hissing sound, or a couple of different hissing sounds. One known as a disturbance hiss, the other known as a fighting hiss. Not to be outdone, however, the San Antonio Zoo, for Valentine's Day this year, not only offered people the opportunity to name a Madagascar hissing cockroach after someone that they are not particularly fond of, but also for a small fee, offered that person the opportunity to watch a live video of that cockroach being fed to one of the zoo's animals. I kid you not. My guess is quite a few people were willing to take the San Antonio Zoo up on that offer. I'll bet there's a lot of people who would have loved that opportunity. But my guess is nobody would have loved that opportunity more than Jonah would have. My guess is Jonah would have spent every last dollar he had on cockroaches, and he would have given them all the same name: Ninevite. Ninevite. Oh, Jonah. Worst prophet ever. On the application for prophet, there's only 2 job requirements. 1, be willing to go wherever it is that God wants to send you. And 2, deliver a message of God's hope or peace or comfort or strength or joy or judgment to the people that God wants you to deliver it to. Jonah not only doesn't want to go where God wants him to go, the city of Nineveh, an ancient city in what is now northern Iraq. Not only does he not want to go to Nineveh, which was a part of the Assyrian Empire at the time, but he is willing to literally go to the end of the earth not to. Instead of going to Nineveh the way God wants him to, Jonah immediately turns, goes the other way, and gets on a ship headed for a place called Tarshish. Tarshish is considered to be a location in what is now Spain, which for Jonah and the rest of his fellow ancient Israelites in that time and place was considered to actually be the other end of the earth. So not only does Jonah not want to go, he's willing to go to the ends of the earth to avoid it. But then when he does go, well, in terms of delivering the message of God's hope or peace or joy or comfort or strength or judgment to the people that God wants him to deliver it to, as we heard in the passage Paul read, Nineveh is a city that takes 3 days to walk across. Jonah goes one day, says, I'm good. Let's have a drink. And that's it. And as for the actual message, well, 40 days more and Nineveh will be overthrown. Overthrown, translated often in other versions of the Bible as destroyed. 40 days more and Nineveh will be destroyed. Technically, it, I suppose, falls under the category of a message of God's judgment. But there's a couple of things missing. The first is that in every other book in the Bible related to the prophets, Whenever God has a message to send to a particular person or ruler or group, we usually get the actual message. God will say to a particular prophet, "Go and tell so-and-so this and that." We don't get that here. The author tells us nothing about God giving a specific message to Jonah. We get what Jonah says, but nowhere do we have God telling him exactly what to say. Now, there are allusions in the passage, as we heard, that God intends to bring calamity upon the people of Nineveh if they don't change their ways. That God wants Jonah to cry out against the people of Nineveh. So, all right, we'll give it that. But there's something else missing, and it's the most important part. See, also, in every other book of the Bible related to the prophets, when God calls on somebody to send a message of judgment, there is always, somewhere nearby, a message of hope, correction, the possibility for a second chance. That ain't here. That part's missing in what Jonah says. And what I want to suggest to you this morning is Jonah chose to leave that out. Jonah wants absolutely no part of the Ninevites getting a second chance. Jonah wants them to be overthrown, wants them to be destroyed. Now, it's a little bit understandable on Jonah's part. The Assyrians were known by historians. Historians have documented the Assyrians were a rather violent people. And Jonah's people had experienced that Assyrian violence firsthand at times in their history. So, I get that. But still, for Jonah, that city of Nineveh was nothing but thousands and thousands of Madagascar hissing cockroaches that he wanted nothing more than to see fed to a zoo animal. Despite Jonah's less than stellar work as a prophet, the Ninevites get that second chance anyway, because it's what God wants for them. They change their ways. They turn their lives around. They do better. They commit to living the way that God wants them to. And so God gives them that second chance. God decides not to carry out the calamity that God decided to bring upon them. We're told that God changed God's mind. Now, a couple of things about that, just as a quick aside. This idea of God choosing to bring calamity upon the people of Nineveh. That reflects what was a very predominant theological view in the world of the ancient Israelites. A theological view that is still at times fairly prominent in the Christian tradition. The idea that God intentionally inflicts destruction, calamity, punishment on those who do not live according to God's ways. I have to tell you that is not a theology that I am on board with. Not my thought. I understand that whole thing differently. I see that as representative, symbolizing the idea that when we do not live the way that God calls us to, bad things happen. They often happen as the natural consequence of the choice that we have made to not live the way God calls us to. That's a very different way of seeing that. Not always, but oftentimes, when we choose not to live the way that God calls us to, bad things happen. And not just to us, to others because of that. Now, as for this idea of God changing God's mind, this is not the only time in the Bible that happens. It happens a handful of times. And each time it is symbolic of the same thing. It symbolizes that we are the people of a God of second chances. A God who is willing to let us have the opportunity to change, to turn our lives around, to do and to be better. And even after we have made mistakes, change in ways that at least perhaps will minimize the harm that's been caused already. But Jonah wants no part of that. He can't stand that idea. He can't stand that idea more than he can't stand the Ninevites. He hates that idea so much that he says to God, I would rather die than for the Ninevites to turn their lives around, to change, to not be destroyed. I would rather die. But God does it anyway. Because that's what love does. I don't mean love in the Valentine's Day sense. Not romantic love, not love as an emotion, not love as a feeling, but love as it is understood in the spiritual sense, particularly in the Christian spiritual tradition. In the Christian spiritual tradition, love is understood as an act. It's a verb. It is a decision. It is a choice that we are called on to make, that we have the opportunity to make, moment by moment. The choice to give others a second chance to do better, to be better. A second chance that we choose to give because we believe, as God does, that all of us are capable of doing better. And because we also recognize and accept that God gives all of us second chances. Because we all need it. The great irony of this story, the great irony of Jonah's call and travels, is that he is so unwilling. He would rather die than for the Ninevites to get a second chance to do better at the very same time. At the very same time that he gets a second chance himself to do better. This is the second time, remember, that God has asked him to go to Nineveh. After the first time, gets on that ship, headed to Tarshish, ends up in the big fish, the part we're not talking about today. Ends up in the big fish. Gets spewed out of the big fish, as the text says. And then God says, okay, I'm giving you a second chance to go. He gets a second chance and refuses to take part in the Ninevites getting one. And the thing is, he doesn't even get a second chance, he gets a third chance. See, at the end of the story, he's still angry. He still hates the fact that the Ninevites have been spared, that they've done better, turned their lives around. He hates that. So he goes off by himself to power. And he builds a tent. But God sends a bush. God creates a bush to shade him from the intense sun of the desert. But then overnight, God gets rid of the bush. So the next day, Jonah is caught in the blazing sun, and he's overheated, and he's absolutely miserable, and he's mourning the loss of the bush. And God says to him, here you are. You care so much about this bush you had nothing to do with. But yet you don't want me to give a second chance to these people that I created. These people who are my sons and daughters, no matter how you feel about them. The thing is, he's not alone. Jonah's not alone. I worry sometimes very deeply at the way our culture is becoming. That we are becoming more and more a culture that does not want to give second chances. A country that more and more has political leaders who would rather die than see those they disagree with or are not particularly fond of do well. Do something that is good for all of us. We have the growing emergence of what's come to be known as cancel culture. The ability of social media to create movements of people who demand that some people lose their jobs, have to offer endless apologies, or just simply go away forever because of one thing that they have said or done. Not a pattern of things, but sometimes just one thing that they have said or done that these people disagree with or do not like. And the continuation of a criminal justice system that incarcerates more people by rate than any other what are considered to be the first world nations on the planet, while at the same time doing very, very little in the way of genuine rehabilitation and reintegration of people into society once they have paid their debt. We must do better at second chances, because we are the people of a God of second chances. So, this Valentine's Day weekend, my guess is, perhaps, some of you may have a Madagascar hissing cockroach with somebody's name on it, or some group's name on it. That at times, perhaps, you would like nothing more than to see fed to a zoo animal. But the question for us as God's people is, what are we going to do with that cockroach? Are we going to hope, anticipate, love the idea that it might get fed to a zoo animal? Watch gladly as it does? Or will we offer it a second chance? The way God offers those people and us